Look straight into the lens of the reconnaissance drone. A multi-million-dollar T-90M flying fortress is advancing steadily, only to be suddenly ambushed by a cheap flycam, its turret blown off in a furious column of fire. In September 2025 Donetsk, the battlefield was ablaze, with the steel carcasses of more than 100 T-90 MIs, those that the Kremlin once lauded as invincible. With a horrific 1,159 Russian tanks obliterated by the end of the year, a burning question is raised. Why has Moscow's pride turned into mobile steel coffins? What brutal tactics did Ukraine use to turn this land into the largest tank graveyard of the 21st century? To unravel that mystery, we must turn back to the first pages of Russia's invasion plan, where overconfidence inadvertently became a lethal poison. In theory, the T-90M Prorov is not just a tank. It is a symbol of the resurgence of Russian military power. Russian state media, exemplified by the TASS news agency, spared no words in praising this as the unrivaled main battle tank model in the world. With the new generation relict explosive reactive armor system and protection layers supposedly capable of completely ignoring top anti-tank missiles like the Javelin or NLAW, the Kremlin confidently greenlit a large-scale armored sweep. However, it was precisely this complacency built upon flashy advertisements that created a toxic mindset of overconfidence among field commanders. They believed that the raw muscle of steel could crush all resistance, only to then drive their soldiers into a horrific massacre. The second mistake, and also the most serious one, lay in a tactical mindset that had been outdated for decades. The Russian military seemingly remains trapped in an obsolete Soviet military doctrine, using steel to overwhelm manpower. In the open fields of Donetsk, instead of deploying flexible formations, Russian armored units chose to line up horizontally or advance in long, drawn-out vertical columns. This was a foolish act of exposing themselves to enemy fire. In the era of modern warfare, these heavy blocks of steel move sluggishly across muddy terrain, becoming extremely predictable moving targets. The rigidity in maneuvering made Russian tanks no different from chess pieces pinned down on Ukraine's chessboard. The backwardness of supporting technology was also a compounding blow to Russia's failure. Despite possessing powerful 125mm cannons, the T-90M was completely blind to aerial threats. The electronic warfare EW systems accompanying the tanks operated ineffectively or frequently broke down, leaving them completely helpless against cheap FPV drones. Weakness in combined arms coordination turned these tanks into solitary oases on the battlefield. Without infantry protecting their flanks or air defense systems covering their heads, Moscow's prides were neutralized one by one. When confidence turns into recklessness, and when hard steel must face flexible minds, disaster is inevitable. Russia entered the battle with a rock-solid belief that they would crush the opponent with mass, but they forgot that Ukraine no longer fights using old methods. If Russia's mistake was arrogance, then Ukraine's answer was a multi-layered defense system meticulously designed like a giant meat grinder. They did not just wait for Russian troops to arrive to open fire. They actively lured million-dollar blocks of steel into a maze with no escape. Here, modern technology and flexible operational thinking turned Russia's numerical advantage into a deadly burden. The first defensive layer: divine eyes from above. The Donetsk battlefield from Ukraine's perspective is no longer a stretch of land obscured by gunsmoke, but a transparent greenhouse. Thanks to a reconnaissance drone network operating 24/7, every smallest movement of the Russian troops is exposed under the brutal light of digital data. Can you imagine? From the moment a T-90M starts its engine in the rear, the roar of the motor and the emitted heat have already been picked up by long-range sensors. Ukrainian drones do not just observe, they track. Every coordinate, velocity, and movement formation is transmitted directly to command centers in real time. Russia wants to carry out a surprise attack. That is an illusion. On this glass battlefield, Secrecy has been put to death, leaving columns of tanks advancing steadily into the sights without ever knowing they are being closely watched by the Grim Reaper. Once the prey has entered the net, Ukraine activates the second defensive layer: smart minefields. These are no longer the silent mines waiting for someone to step on them from the previous century. Ukraine has elevated the war by using 3D mines and remote anti-armor mine systems, RAAMS, delivered by artillery. Picture this horrific scene as Russian tank formations are advancing at high speed. Ukrainian artillery suddenly rains shells directly behind and on both their flanks. These shells do not explode immediately but release hundreds of anti-tank mines to surround the Russian troops. In an instant, the retreat path is cut off, and the flanks are locked tight by invisible steel traps. The lead vehicle hits a mine jerking to a halt as an obstacle. The vehicle behind tries to avoid it, only to fall into the next death pit. Russia's vanguard formation is completely paralyzed in the middle of an open field, turning the most modern T-90Ms into fixed target practice for enemy fire. And when the enemy is panicked, Ukraine unleashes the third defensive layer, the combined punch, the bloodiest finishing blow. This is the moment the symphony of fire and steel begins to play. From the tree lines, Javelin missiles are launched with a top attack trajectory, piercing the thinnest armor layer atop the T-90M turret. At the same time, GPS-guided artillery pours down rains of cluster munitions, accurate to the centimeter. But the most terrifying factor is the appearance of the 47th Mechanized Brigade, an elite unit equipped with NATO's most advanced weaponry. Instead of passive defense, they actively counterattack with the Bradley and Abrams dynamic duo. The Bradleys, with 25mm autocannons and Tau missiles, do not fear the T-90M's thick armor. They use an extremely high rate of fire to neutralize the Russian tank's optics and sensors, turning the opponent into blind men in the middle of battle. Then the Abrams or Leopards will emerge from the shadows, delivering fatal shots from a distance where Russian tank guns cannot react in time. This is not a traditional tank duel. This is a coordinated execution where every link in the Ukrainian war machine operates with absolute precision. Is there any escape for the Russian crews when there are mines ahead, artillery behind, and drone ghosts overhead waiting to finish them off? The answer lies in the piles of blackened steel carcasses growing higher and higher on the Donetsk fields. Moscow's mobile fortresses have collapsed before an active defensive tactic where cunning has crushed brutality. Imagine you are a Russian crew member sitting inside the control compartment of a T-90M. Surrounding you are steel layers, hundreds of millimeters thick, advanced fire control computer systems, and the promise of a swift victory. But the reality outside the observation slit is a vivid nightmare. The roar of the diesel engine is drowned out by a sound many times more haunting, the high-pitched buzzing of FPV drones. This is the very moment the pride of the Russian defense industry collapses before a $200 technological toy. The sight of a T-90M being destroyed by a drone is no longer a rare occurrence. It has become a brutal rule in Donetsk. With just a cheap RPG-7 warhead attached to the plastic frame of a flycam, a Ukrainian operator from a distance of 5 kilometers can execute a precision strike on the tank's fatal weaknesses, the gap between the turret and the hull, or the rear engine compartment. As the immense heat jet from the warhead penetrates the armor, it detonates the ammunition storage arranged in the carousel format characteristic of Russian tank lines. The result: an earth-shattering explosion that sends the multi-ton turret soaring into the air like a toy. This collapse occurs not only physically, but also as a total psychological breakdown for Russian tank soldiers. They realize that even while sitting in the most expensive vehicle, they are still merely moving targets in a game of life and death where the opponent holds all the cards. Faced with this dire situation, the Russian military has attempted to deploy desperate stopgap measures. They have thrown glide bomb aircraft KA-B and KA-52 Alligator attack helicopters into the fray to provide remote support. However, the sky is no longer a safe place either. Ukraine has already laid a dense, low-altitude air defense fire net with man-pad systems like the Stinger or Starstreak. Russia's million-dollar helicopters, when attempting to close in to relieve the tanks, have been shot down mercilessly, forming free-falling fireballs in the middle of the battlefield. Even more to counter drones, Russia gave birth to a military monstrosity called the Turtle Tank T-90S, or T-72S, encased in a giant steel shell that looks like a mobile shed. This is the clearest testament to the deadlock they are willing to sacrifice visibility and the ability to rotate the turret in exchange for a fragile chance of survival against tiny drones. But the peak of this desperation must be the suicide by motorcycle tactic. Realizing that tanks are too expensive and easily detected by reconnaissance drones, Russian commanders made an insane decision, using dirt bikes and ATVs to carry out lightning raids. They hoped that the speed and small size of the motorcycles could help soldiers cross minefields and escape the drone sights. But the reality at Vuhledar threw a cold bucket of water on that illusion. In less than 10 minutes, a unit of 15 motorcycles speeding through the dust was completely wiped out by Ukrainian FPV drone teams. The motorcycles lacked even a single layer of protection, turning Russian soldiers into flesh targets exposed to the gunfire. An attack expected to be a breakthrough ended in a deadly tragedy where blackened motorcycle remains lay scattered alongside soldiers who never had a chance to reach the enemy trenches. Ukraine did not stop at passive defense. They turned the Russian retreat into a bloody pursuit. As Russian armored units began to flee in chaos, Ukraine immediately rained down cluster munitions, DPICM. Thousands of submunitions exploded over a wide area, shredding infantry units trying to follow the tanks. Afterward, giant Baba Yaga drones would appear at night, using thermal cameras to scour every bush and hollow, ensuring that no Russian unit could regroup. Ukraine's adaptation has turned the battlefield into a deadly ecosystem, where cheap technology and artificial intelligence are gradually replacing the obsolete military theories of the last century. Blood has been spilled, steel has burned, and what remains on the Donetsk fields is a naked truth. When you cannot adapt, you will be wiped out. Russia's desperation in searching for a tactical way out has inadvertently exposed the backwardness of a military empire, trying to cling to the glory of the past with a series of blunders. The Ukrainian battlefield in 2025 is not just a testing ground for weapons, but also a graveyard for obsolete military mindsets. What we have witnessed in Donetsk has sent a steel-clad message to the entire world. Tanks are by no means dead, but the doctrine of using tanks as an invincible protective amulet has permanently receded into the past. Ukraine has proven a brutal truth. Intellect, flexibility, and low-cost technology can break the massive physical power of an empire. When a drone worth as much as a smartphone can take down $1 million flying fortress, the balance of power on the battlefield has been completely overturned. Looking toward the future, this war is entering a fierce new chapter. With the appearance of F-16 Ghosts dominating the skies and long-range punches from ATACMS missiles striking directly at the jugular of logistics, the Russian military is being backed into a corner. Will Moscow be able to adapt to a war where steel is no longer king, or will they continue to throw their soldiers into the meat grinder, using even more ridiculous means? The reality in Donetsk is a warning to any military that still dreams of the power of heavy blocks of iron while lacking digital technology protection. Modern warfare is not for those who are slow and conservative. What do you think about the image of motorcycles going to battle to replace tanks in the midst of a blazing battlefield? Is that the pinnacle of creativity, or the final sign of a military that is reaching its end? Please leave your opinions in the comment section below. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next in-depth military analyses.